Right, so let's get into this chat now. So the Miss SA pageant is caught up in a controversy about the eligibility of a top 13 finalist, Adetshina. She was born to a Nigerian father and a South African mother with Mozambican roots. Now, some South Africans have now launched an online petition to oppose her participation. But let's get some view on this. We're joined by Kevin Smith, who's a partner at Ahmed Ghani Attorneys. Kevin, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a conversation for just over a week now. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on, when you see the conversation really starting to make waves on social media. This young woman, Chidima Vanessa Onwe, Adetshina, a contestant in this year's Miss South Africa pageant. Your first thoughts?
Look, I think the rhetoric around her citizenship status, I think more than anything, it's just an anti-black and xenophobic sentiment. If you look at the arguments that have been made, people are arguing on behalf of the fact that one of her parents or both of them are not South African or don't have South African origin. But if you look at the requirements to enter Miss SA, you have to be a citizen with an SA ID book. And the fact that she's made it this far actually proves that she's, in fact, got the minimum criteria. So the argument should have been a non-starter to begin with.
Yeah, one of the discussions that... one of the points that had been made is many South Africans that perhaps are first or second or even third generation from another country but are citizens of South Africa do live in this country. And there's the argument that had her name, for instance, been, Michelle Adetshina, that it would have been different. The fact that her name is Chidima Vanessa Onwe Adetshina as well has sparked the attention. What do you say to that? Is that a surface level discussion?
Look, if we take the discussion at face value, then it might seem that that's the only issue that's at play. But if we are going to take the matter for what people are purporting it to be, then how far along down the line of someone's lineage do we have to look for them to be considered South African? Do they have to have South African parents? Does it have to go further to their grandparents, great-grandparents? Or does the discussion then become only indigenous inhabitants of South Africa, where it becomes a matter where those who are declared First Nation status by the UN, will they be the only ones who are declared South African enough to compete on a stage like this? And I mean, that's something that everyone can admit would become ridiculous. And I don't just say that based on what's happening now, but I say that in my capacity as a chief of an indigenous tribe myself. This isn't something where we can define South African as just by your parents or your grandparents. Being South African has a lot more to do with various other factors. Like our constitution also points out, the country it belongs to everyone who inhabits it. So the discussion, I think people need to have an honest reflection in terms of where our society is right now and where our tolerance for the rest of our continent lies, because South Africa is not an island. We are still part of Africa. And outside of that, she is a South African herself. So she shouldn't be facing the backlash that she's currently facing.
Yeah, you raise such an interesting point when you talk about what is it exactly that makes up a South African. And I think perhaps that is something that we should get into the technicalities of, right? Chidima Adetshina, her dad is Nigerian. Her mother was born and raised in South Africa but has roots from Mozambique. So at what point do we say that she is South African? So I'm trying to get the technicalities of that from a legal point of view, that is, right? And I don't want to talk about identity because that's a much broader spectrum there and we talk for hours. But if we talk about legally, right? So her mother, for instance, is a South African. That should be sufficient, right?
Correct. If you look at the law itself, for you to be declared a citizen prior to the 6th of October 1995, if you were just born in South Africa, you are considered a citizen. After the 6th of October 1995, if you are born in South Africa and you have one South African parent, then you are considered a citizen. So she meets that criteria. So legally speaking, yes, she is South African because she was born in South Africa, she has a South African parent, and the law declares her to be a citizen itself. So outside of what the public discourse currently is, the law has made itself clear on these types of issues. So if the public isn't satisfied with how the law deems citizenship, then that's a separate discussion that the public needs to engage our legislature on. But
Yeah.
as it stands, there is nothing legally that says that she's not just as South African as the rest of us.
I wanna look at some tweets that certainly have been shared on social media. They're called X's now, aren't they? People and what they're saying on social media around this discussion. Mapriga, for instance, says you automatically qualify for South African citizenship if you are born in South Africa and at least one of your parents is a South African citizen or an SA permanent residency permit holder. If you are adopted by a South African citizen, that is SA law. So this particular person really understanding that view that Kevin Smith is sharing with us as well this morning. Let's bring another one on. Mashishi says, unfortunately, she's not a South African. Her father is Nigerian and her mother's Mozambican. She had both these flags on her bio on social media accounts. She engages more in Nigerian audiences. That she is not pro-South African regardless of her descendants. She cannot represent us. Perhaps that's something to discuss with you, Kevin, as well. But let's see. Thabo Puti Mojela says, silly question that only arises when one is African. Kevin, someone saying that, well, if she does consider herself a South African, then even her social media platforms should reflect that and not her Nigerian heritage or her Mozambican heritage. What do you say to that?
Look, I think for someone to preclude her from celebrating the heritage of her family, I think that's just ridiculous. Her being South African doesn't mean that she now also has to separate herself from the rest of her family or separate herself from the rest of her identity. I think as a society right now, most of our citizens don't know the full lineage of their own heritage. And these studies have been conducted where certain South African tribes have been found to be from Zambia or originate more north into the central parts of Africa. So it's something where I think as South Africans, this is an opportunity for us now to actually galvanize ourselves, not just as South Africans, but as Africans in general, and to understand that our African heritage is just as important as our South African heritage. And for us to move our continent forward and for us to stop being or to stop suffering at the hands of the West, especially how our continent suffers at the hands of the West, we need to unite with each other first internally and externally. Because if we are going to become a global force, not just as South Africa, but as Africans as a whole,
Yeah.
we need to stop having the anti-Black and the anti-xenophobic rhetoric that always rears its head at these types of events, where these types of situations arise when other Africans are involved.
Now let's take a look at more X's because this has been quite the conversation online, right? Clever Black says, when representing South Africa at international spaces, the focus should never shift to whether she is South African, Nigerian, or Mozambican. The right to South African pride should be unadulterated. We can't have a Miss SA who was also claimed by Nigerians and Mozambicans. Yeah, we're going to keep the X's coming in. At Newsroom 405, if you'd like to share your thoughts with this one. I think before I let you go, Kevin, your final thoughts on this, right? What it says to the world, for instance, when we have Chidima Vanessa Onwe Adetshina, let's say she makes it all the way to the top and she wins Miss South Africa. She represents us, for instance, at Miss Universe. What does that say to the world about the country that we are?
I think what it should say to the world is that it shows the world that South Africa is in fact a melting pot. It is not just one in theory, but it is one in practice. If you look at the dynamics of South Africa and what makes up not just our heritage, but the people who inhabit it, you see that we are people from a vast amount of places and we have a lot of heritages. If you think about a few years back, Vanessa Carrera, she won Miss South Africa and she was born to Portuguese and Angolan parents. So this is nothing new to South Africa. It's nothing new to Miss SA either. I think what we need to start doing is that we need to start showing a united front. We need to start showing that South Africa can move beyond racial and demographic prejudices, because that is something that is still plaguing us within our society. And yes, as a young democracy, as some people call it, these are the issues that we will still be dealing with for some time. But these are the types of situations that can help us as a public move forward and the public discourse can now mature past these types of issues.
Yeah, an interesting debate that we're having as a country nonetheless. Kevin, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Kevin Smith is a partner at Ahmed Ghani Attorneys. All right.